The old man thought he was being taken to a nursing home, but when he stepped out of the car, he was shocked. Hello, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment what you think is going to happen, and let's see if you can guess it. Write your prediction below, and at the end, I'll give you the answer. As the old man sat quietly in the back of the car, his mind wandered. The hum of the engine and the soft whispers of the radio were the only sounds filling the silent journey. He had spent years living independently, his own two hands tending to the small apartment he called home. But now his body was failing him, and the inevitable talk of care had come up. He had tried to argue, to reason that he didn't need help, but his children insisted. Today, they had told him they were taking him to visit a place where he could be more comfortable. The words felt cold and distant, and though he loved his family, he couldn't shake the growing unease in his chest. The car finally came to a halt. He looked out the window, expecting the gray walls of a nursing home, the dull surroundings of a facility he had always feared. But what greeted his eyes was something else entirely. The place they had brought him to was grand, a large estate that sprawled over green hills with lush gardens surrounding it. It was nothing like the sterile, lifeless building he had envisioned. He hesitated for a moment, trying to understand what he was seeing, but his daughter gently opened the door, encouraging him to step out. As his feet touched the gravel driveway, the old man's heart raced. He blinked, the sun warming his weathered face, and for the first time in years, a sense of wonder filled him. This was no nursing home. He turned to his daughter, confusion etched across his features, but she only smiled softly, holding his hand. "Dad, we wanted to surprise you," she whispered. His mind reeled. Why had they brought him here? What was this place? A woman dressed in elegant yet simple attire approached them, her steps light and graceful. "Welcome," she said, her voice kind yet professional. "We've been expecting you." The old man's grip tightened on his daughter's hand. Expecting him? His heart pounded. For a moment, he thought of turning back, climbing into the car, and refusing to go any further. But something in his daughter's eyes, something in her calm demeanor, made him pause. Whatever was about to happen, it was not what he had feared. He had no idea just how much his life was about to change. The old man followed his daughter and the woman through a large wrought iron gate, which creaked softly as it opened. He glanced back at the car, parked at a distance, and felt a pang of uncertainty. Everything here was unfamiliar. The towering trees that lined the cobblestone path, the sweet scent of blooming flowers that hung in the air, and the vast estate that stretched out before him. His mind raced with questions, but he remained silent, trusting his daughter, though confusion clouded his thoughts. They walked towards a grand building, its stone walls weathered yet regal. The woman leading them turned and said, "Mr. Collins, this estate was once a sanctuary for the weary, a place where people came to find peace and solace." The words floated in the air, leaving the old man more bewildered. His daughter had still said little, only offering a reassuring smile every now and then. But her silence was troubling, and as they neared the entrance, he couldn't hold back anymore. "Why am I here?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly with age and uncertainty. His daughter stopped, looking at him with a mix of compassion and anticipation. "Dad, this isn't a nursing home," she began softly. "We didn't want to tell you everything at once, because we didn't want you to worry. This place, it's special." She glanced at the woman, who nodded in understanding, then continued. "It's a place where people can live freely, without the constraints of traditional care. It's more like a community, a sanctuary." Her words left him stunned. He had prepared himself for the confines of a small room, for nurses and medications, for the slow, inevitable descent into a quiet life of solitude. But what she was describing was something entirely different. "A sanctuary?" he repeated, still not fully grasping the situation. The woman leading them smiled and added, "Yes, here, residents are encouraged to live their lives fully, to rediscover the joys they once had. There are no restrictions, no locked doors. It's a place to live, not just exist." As they passed through the large wooden doors, the old man was greeted by a warm, inviting interior. The walls were adorned with paintings, and the soft light filtering through the large windows bathed the room in a golden hue. A few elderly people sat in the lounge area, laughing and talking, their faces animated with joy. It was the opposite of what he had imagined. There were no sterile hallways, no cold hospital-like rooms. Instead, it felt like a home, vibrant, alive, full of warmth. He stood there, taking it all in. His heart swelled with a mix of emotions, relief, confusion, and something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Could this really be his new life? Could he find happiness here? After all these years of fearing what old age would bring? His daughter squeezed his hand gently. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we wanted you to have a place where you could thrive, not just survive." He looked at her, tears welling in his eyes, and nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The old man awoke the next morning in a spacious room that felt more like a retreat than a place meant for the elderly. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow on the rustic wooden furniture. For the first time in years, he hadn't been woken by the aches and pains that usually accompanied his mornings. Instead, there was a sense of calm that had settled over him, and with it, a quiet curiosity. He slowly got out of bed and moved to the window. The view that greeted him was breathtaking. Rolling hills, a vibrant garden blooming with flowers of every color, and in the distance, a small lake that shimmered in the morning light. It was almost surreal. How could this be the place he had feared? There were no hospital beds, no beeping machines, no nurses rushing down the halls. Just peace. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was the woman who had welcomed him the day before. "Good morning, Mr. Collins," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I hope you slept well. We have a few activities planned for today, and I'd love to show you around." The old man hesitated. Activities? He hadn't participated in any group events in years, not since his body had started slowing down. But there was something inviting about the way she spoke, something that made him want to know more about this strange place. As they walked down the hall, the woman explained more about the estate. This place was built on the idea that aging doesn't have to be the end of living. Many of the residents here were like you once, reluctant, unsure, even a little scared. But over time, they've found that there's still so much life left to enjoy. They passed a group of residents sitting in the garden, laughing and chatting as they worked on a small vegetable patch. Further down, another group was gathered by the lake, sketching the landscape and sharing stories. The old man stopped, his eyes following their movements. It was as if the people here had forgotten their age, their ailments, and were simply living in the moment. He couldn't help but wonder, could he do the same? "Do you really think I could fit in here?" he asked, his voice tinged with doubt. The woman smiled warmly. "You're already fitting in more than you realize, Mr. Collins. It's not about what you can or can't do. It's about finding joy in what you can." She led him to a large room where an art class was in progress. Easels were set up around the room, each resident absorbed in their own creations. Some were painting, others sculpting, but all of them were completely engaged. One of the residents, an elderly man with paint smeared on his apron, looked up and waved. "Come join us," he called. The old man hesitated, unsure of how to respond, but the warmth of the invitation was undeniable. Slowly, he stepped forward, unsure of what he would contribute, but curious nonetheless. He hadn't held a paintbrush in years, yet as he took his place at one of the easels, something stirred inside him. The scent of the paints, the feel of the brush in his hand. It was familiar, comforting, like an old memory coming back to life. The class resumed, the room filled with the quiet hum of creativity. And as the old man dipped his brush into the vibrant colors, he felt a spark he hadn't felt in years, a spark of possibility. The days passed in a blur of discovery. The old man, who had once felt resigned to a quiet, isolated life, now found himself surrounded by an unexpected warmth. Each morning brought new activities: gardening, painting, storytelling sessions by the lake, and slowly but surely, the walls he had built around himself began to crumble. It was not the kind of place he had expected. It wasn't a facility for the frail, but rather a place where people came to rediscover their passions and embrace the life they still had left to live. He had never imagined that he would be part of such a community, but here he was. Each interaction, each smile exchanged with the other residents chipped away at his doubt. One afternoon, as he sat by the lake sketching the horizon, He was joined by an elderly woman named Margaret. Her hair was silver, but her eyes sparkled with the energy of someone much younger. "You've taken to this place well," she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had lived many lifetimes. He looked up from his drawing and smiled, something that had become easier to do in recent days. "I didn't think I would," he admitted. "I thought I was coming here to fade away, but instead, I feel like I'm coming alive again." Margaret chuckled, nodding in understanding. "That's the magic of this place. It's not about giving up. It's about starting over. We've all been where you are now, thinking the end was near. But as you've seen, there's still so much more ahead." Their conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in years, the old man felt like he was truly connecting with someone. They shared stories of their pasts, of love and loss, of triumphs and regrets, and by the end of the afternoon, he realized that he hadn't felt this free in decades. Margaret's words stayed with him long after they parted ways. Could it be that this new chapter in his life was not the end, but the beginning of something entirely unexpected? That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the estate in a golden glow, the old man wandered through the gardens alone. His mind was full, not of worries or fears, but of ideas, things he wanted to do, experiences he had yet to explore. For so long, he had allowed his age to define him, to limit his possibilities. But now, surrounded by people who lived with such vitality, he realized that age was just a number. It didn't have to dictate how he lived the rest of his life. As he walked, he spotted a small group of residents gathered around a fire pit, their laughter echoing in the cool evening air. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should join them. But then, remembering Margaret's words, he pushed aside his doubts and made his way over. They welcomed him with open arms, offering him a seat and a cup of tea. The fire crackled softly as they shared stories and sang old songs, their voices blending together in perfect harmony. For the first time in years, the old man felt a sense of belonging, not because he had been forced into a routine or made to follow a set of rules, but because he had chosen to embrace the life still left within him. As the night deepened and the stars filled the sky, he looked around at the faces of those who had become his new family. He realized then that he was no longer afraid of what the future held. Instead, he was excited. This place had given him a second chance, a chance to live, not merely exist. The old man woke up the next day feeling more rested than he had in years. As he sat at the breakfast table, sipping his coffee and watching the birds outside the window, he couldn't help but feel grateful for the peace that had settled in his heart. The days of dread and resignation were behind him. Instead, he was filled with a sense of purpose, though he wasn't entirely sure what that purpose would be. Later that morning, while taking a stroll through the garden, he encountered a familiar face. It was Margaret, sitting on a bench, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on a project. She smiled as he approached. "You look like a man with a lot on his mind," she observed, her eyes twinkling. He chuckled, taking a seat beside her. "I suppose I do," he admitted. "It's strange. For years, I thought my life was winding down, but now, I feel like I've been given a second chance. I just don't know what to do with it." Margaret paused her knitting and looked at him thoughtfully. "You don't have to know right away," she said gently. "But the important thing is that you're open to it. That's how all of us started when we came here. Unsure of what the future held, but willing to see where it would lead us." Her words resonated with him. He had spent so much time worrying about the things he could no longer do that he hadn't considered all the things he still could. It wasn't too late for him to make a difference, to contribute something meaningful. But what? He looked around at the beautiful estate, the laughter of the residents, the activities that filled each day. It was clear that this place was special, but it was the people who made it truly extraordinary. The conversation with Margaret lingered in his mind as the days went on. He found himself drawn to the community, wanting to do more than simply participate in the activities. He wanted to give back, to contribute to the joy and sense of purpose that had been reignited within him. One afternoon, while helping some of the other residents tend to the garden, the idea struck him. He had always loved teaching. Before retirement, he had been a history professor, passionate about sharing knowledge and sparking curiosity in young minds. The memories of those days were bittersweet, as his declining health had forced him to leave the profession he loved earlier than he had wanted. But now, here in this place, he wondered if he could find a way to bring that part of his life back. The next day, he approached the staff with his idea. "I've been thinking," he began hesitantly, "what if we started a series of talks or classes for the residents? Nothing too formal, but something to engage the mind. I could lead a few sessions on history or storytelling. I know we all have stories to share, and maybe it could bring everyone even closer together." The woman he spoke to smiled warmly. "That's a wonderful idea, Mr. Collins. Many of our residents would love to participate in something like that. We've had similar events before, but nothing quite like what you're suggesting. I think it could be a great addition to our community." The old man felt a wave of excitement and nervousness wash over him. Could he really do this again? Could he reignite that passion for teaching and help others rediscover their own love for learning? There was only one way to find out. A week later, the old man found himself standing at the front of a cozy room, sunlight streaming through the windows as residents gathered in anticipation. His hands trembled slightly as he looked at the faces before him. Some were curious, others eager, and a few simply enjoyed the idea of a new way to spend their time. This was the moment he had been preparing for, his first session as the community's storyteller and teacher. It had been years since he'd stood in front of a group to share knowledge, and though nervous, there was also a thrill bubbling inside him. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his chest. "I'm Mr. Collins, and today, I thought we'd start with something simple, the art of storytelling. All of us have stories to tell, memories from our past, lessons learned, and experiences that shaped us. But what makes a story truly memorable?" He paused, looking at the attentive faces before him. "It's not just the events, but the emotions, the connections, the little moments that linger with us long after the story ends." The room fell silent as he continued, diving into tales from history, moments of courage and resilience that had been passed down through generations. He wove stories from different eras, mixing humor with drama, painting pictures with his words. As he spoke, something remarkable began to happen. The old spark he had thought was long gone flickered to life. He wasn't just teaching, he was connecting, sharing a part of himself that had been dormant for far too long. After an hour, he wrapped up the session by inviting the residents to share their own stories in the coming weeks. "We've all lived through incredible times," he said. "The things we've seen, the places we've been, those are stories worth telling." As the residents clapped, he felt a rush of pride and joy. The nervousness he'd felt at the beginning had melted away, replaced by a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. When the session ended, several residents approached him, their faces alight with excitement. "I haven't thought about those old days in years," one woman said. "But now, I'm eager to dig up some memories and share them with everyone." Another resident, an elderly man with a deep, gravelly voice, added, "I'd forgotten how much I loved learning about history. You've brought something back to life in all of us." The old man smiled, his heart swelling with pride. He had done it. He had found his purpose again. And it wasn't just about teaching facts or sharing stories. It was about reigniting a passion for life in those around him. The session had brought a sense of togetherness, a shared understanding that no matter their age, they still had so much to offer. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly alive. Over the next few weeks, the storytelling sessions became a highlight for the residents. Some shared tales of their childhoods, others spoke of their travels, and a few even revealed secrets they had never told anyone before. The old man guided them through it all, encouraging them, helping them find the right words to express themselves. Each story brought the community closer, deepening the bonds between them. But it wasn't just the residents who were changing. The old man felt a transformation within himself, too. He no longer saw himself as someone nearing the end of his life, but as someone still capable of making a difference. This place had given him more than just a new home. It had given him a new identity, one that was defined not by age, but by purpose. As the weeks turned into months, the old man's storytelling sessions became more than just a pastime for the residents. They became a cornerstone of the community. Each session brought new faces, and with them, New stories that wove a tapestry of shared experiences and emotions. What had started as a simple idea to pass the time had grown into something far greater. The sessions were no longer just about telling tales from the past. They had become a way for the residents to reconnect with who they were and the lives they had lived. The old man found himself at the center of it all, not just as a teacher but as a guide, helping others uncover their own narratives. One afternoon, after a particularly moving session where a resident had shared a deeply personal story about a lost love, the old man realized that the impact of his work was spreading far beyond the confines of the estate. That evening, as he sat by the fire pit, enjoying the cool breeze and the distant sound of laughter from the other residents, a familiar face approached him. It was one of the younger staff members, Emily, who had often sat quietly in the back of his sessions, observing with a thoughtful expression. She pulled up a chair next to him and smiled. "I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Collins," she began, her voice soft but sincere. "What you've done here, it's more than just storytelling. You've brought this place to life in a way none of us expected. It's not just the residents who are benefiting. We, the staff, have learned so much from you as well." The old man was taken aback. He hadn't realized how far-reaching the effects of his sessions had become. "I'm just sharing a bit of history and encouraging others to do the same," he said modestly. But Emily shook her head. "It's more than that. You've created a space where people feel safe to express themselves, to open up in ways they haven't in years. Even I've found myself reflecting on my own life, thinking about the stories I have yet to tell. You've started something here, something that's growing." Her words left him silent for a moment. He had never thought of it that way. To him, it had been about finding a purpose, about using his past experiences to bring joy to others. But now, hearing Emily's words, he realized that his efforts had created a ripple effect, touching lives in ways he hadn't anticipated. As the days went on, he began to see the evidence of this ripple effect everywhere. Residents who had once been quiet and withdrawn were now engaging more with each other, sharing laughter and stories not just in his sessions, but in the hallways, at mealtimes, and during afternoon walks. Even the staff seemed to carry a new sense of energy, their interactions with the residents becoming more personal, more connected. One afternoon, as the old man sat in the garden, watching the leaves flutter in the breeze, he was joined by Margaret. She sat beside him, her knitting needles clicking softly as they often did. "You've done something remarkable here," she said, her voice warm with admiration. "You've given all of us a reason to look forward to each day." He smiled at her, feeling a sense of pride that was still new to him. "I didn't do it alone," he replied. "All of you, the stories you've shared, the lives you've led, that's what's made this place what it is." Margaret nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "But you were the one who lit the spark. And now we all carry a bit of that flame." The old man sat in silence, absorbing her words. He had never set out to change lives. He had simply wanted to find a way to make his remaining years meaningful. But now he realized that in doing so, he had become a beacon for others, guiding them toward their own paths of rediscovery. It was a humbling realization, one that filled him with a deep sense of contentment. The estate had transformed over the months, not just in appearance but in spirit. What had once been a quiet, peaceful sanctuary for those nearing the end of their journey had become a place full of life, laughter, and shared memories. The old man had never imagined that his storytelling sessions would create such a profound change, not only in others but also in himself. One afternoon, as he prepared for another session, the staff member, Emily, approached him with a serious expression. "Mr. Collins, there's something we need to talk about," she said quietly. He noticed the weight in her voice and immediately felt a shift in the air. "What's the matter?" he asked, concern lining his face. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There's been a lot of attention on what's happening here. People are noticing the changes, the way the residents are more engaged, more alive. The administrators are very impressed, and they've been discussing expanding these sessions into something bigger. They want to offer you a more official role here, something that could help others beyond this estate." The old man was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. The idea of taking his sessions beyond the estate was both thrilling and terrifying. He had found such comfort in the small, intimate group he had come to know. The thought of expanding it into something larger, more formal, made him uneasy. He had always enjoyed the quiet simplicity of life here. But now, he was faced with the possibility of turning this into something far more significant. They want to make this a regular part of the estate's program, Emily continued. And not just here, but at other locations as well. They're talking about broadcasting some of the sessions, making them available to other communities. It's a way for more people to benefit from what you've started. The old man's heart raced. Broadcasting? Expanding? It was so far from the quiet retirement he had envisioned for himself. But at the same time, a part of him couldn't help but feel excited by the possibility. Could he really do this? Could he take what he had built and share it with an even wider audience? That evening, as he sat by the lake, reflecting on the conversation with Emily, Margaret found him once again. She seemed to sense that something was on his mind. "What's troubling you, Mr. Collins?" she asked softly, taking a seat beside him. He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "They want me to expand the storytelling sessions," he explained. "To make them more official, to reach more people. I never imagined things would come to this." Margaret smiled, her wise eyes twinkling in the fading light. "I'm not surprised," she said. "You've touched so many lives here. It makes sense that others would want to be part of that." She paused for a moment, then added, "But the real question is, what do you want?" He looked out at the lake, the gentle ripples reflecting the colors of the sunset. What did he want? He had never thought about it before. For so long, his life had been about what he needed to do. First as a teacher, then as a father, and now as an old man trying to make the most of his remaining years. But now, faced with this new opportunity, he realized that for the first time in a long time, he had a choice. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to keep things the way they are. I love the intimacy of our little group, the connection we've built. But another part of me wonders if I can really make a difference on a larger scale." Margaret nodded, her knitting needles moving rhythmically in her lap. Change is always daunting, especially when it means stepping out of your comfort zone. But remember, it's your decision. You've already done so much good here. Whether you choose to expand or not, that doesn't change. Her words gave him comfort. He didn't have to rush into anything. He could take his time, weigh his options, and decide what felt right. For now, he would focus on the moment, on the connections he had made and the stories still left to share. That night, as the stars sparkled overhead, the old man felt a sense of peace. He didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in a long time, he felt truly in control of his own destiny. Whatever he decided, it would be on his terms. In the days that followed, the old man found himself reflecting deeply on the opportunity laid before him. The idea of expanding his storytelling sessions beyond the estate filled his mind, and while part of him was tempted by the potential to make a larger impact, another part of him clung to the simplicity of what he had already built. It was a delicate balance between comfort and challenge, between staying where he was or taking a leap into the unknown. The residents sensed something was on his mind. Margaret, ever perceptive, gave him space but often smiled knowingly whenever their paths crossed. Emily, too, checked in regularly, offering her support without pushing him one way or the other. Despite their reassurances, the old man felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This was not just about him anymore. It was about the community he had helped to transform. One afternoon, while sitting by the lake, the old man spotted a young boy skipping stones across the water's surface. He recognized him as the grandson of one of the residents. The boy was quiet, focused, and determined, his small hands launching each stone with more force than the last. As the old man watched, a thought occurred to him. Even the smallest actions can send ripples far and wide. Perhaps this decision wasn't just about what he wanted, but about the potential for those ripples to touch lives he had never imagined. The following week, as he stood before the gathered residents for another storytelling session, the old man felt a shift in his perspective. He looked at the familiar faces, Margaret, Emily, and the others who had become his friends, his family in this new chapter of life. They had trusted him, shared their stories with him, and together they had created something beautiful. Could he really turn away from the chance to share that with others? Could he let fear stop him from embracing the unknown? As the session began, his voice was steady, but his mind was elsewhere. He spoke of resilience, of those in history who had faced great challenges, but had chosen to persevere. Each word felt like a reflection of his own inner struggle, and with each story, he felt his decision solidifying. After the session ended and the residents began to disperse, the old man found himself lingering. He watched them go, their laughter and conversation filling the room with warmth. Margaret approached him, her knitting bag slung over her arm, and smiled. "You've made up your mind, haven't you?" He nodded slowly, his decision finally clear. "I have. It's time to take a chance, to see where this can go." Margaret's smile widened. "I knew you would. You've always had more courage than you realized." The old man chuckled softly. "I don't know if it's courage or just a refusal to let things stay the same. But I know one thing. I want to keep making a difference. If that means stepping out of my comfort zone, then so be it." That evening, he met with the estate's administrators to discuss the details of expanding the storytelling sessions. They had already made arrangements to broadcast some of the sessions to other facilities, and the idea of turning it into a series of talks for a wider audience was quickly taking shape. The old man felt a sense of excitement and nervousness wash over him as they discussed the logistics. It was all happening so fast, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to embrace the unknown. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. The old man spent hours planning out new sessions, selecting stories that would resonate with a broader audience. Emily worked closely with him, helping to organize the recordings and ensuring that everything ran smoothly. The other residents were supportive, excited for him, but also sad to see their small, intimate group change. Margaret, ever wise, reassured them that their connection would remain strong, no matter how large the audience grew. And then the day came. The cameras were set up, the room was filled with both familiar faces and new ones, and the old man stood at the front of the room, ready to begin. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This was his leap of faith, his chance to take everything he had learned and shared and bring it to a wider world. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice steady and warm. "Today, I want to talk about how the smallest moments in life can send ripples that we never expected. Each of us has the power to create those ripples, to touch lives in ways we may never see." As he spoke, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. The fear that had once held him back was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. This was his path, and though it had taken him longer than most to find it, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The first broadcast was a success, far beyond anything the old man had anticipated. What had started as a simple gathering of stories had now spread far and wide, touching hearts and minds in communities across the country. People from all walks of life reached out, sharing their own stories and thanking him for reminding them that no matter their age or circumstance, they still had something valuable to offer. As the old man sat in his room one evening, reflecting on how far things had come, a letter arrived. It was from a woman living in a nursing home several states away. She had seen one of his sessions and wrote to thank him for inspiring her to write down her own life stories, something she had never thought to do before. She had felt invisible, forgotten, but through his stories, she had found a new purpose. The letter brought tears to the old man's eyes. This was the ripple effect he had dreamed of, touching lives in ways he had never imagined. Over the following weeks, more letters, emails, and calls poured in. Communities were starting their own storytelling groups, inspired by his example. People were connecting in ways that hadn't seemed possible before, finding comfort and strength in shared experiences. The administrators at the estate were thrilled with the success, and plans to continue the broadcasts were quickly solidified. But amidst the growing attention, the old man remained grounded. He still found the greatest joy in the small, quiet moments, sitting by the fire pit with Margaret, sharing a cup of tea with Emily, and hearing the residents laugh and talk after a storytelling session. While his influence had expanded, the heart of his work remained in these intimate connections. One evening, after another successful broadcast, Emily approached him with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Collins," she said, "have you ever thought about writing a book? You have so many stories to tell, and I think it could reach even more people." The old man smiled at the idea. He hadn't thought of himself as a writer, but the suggestion sparked something in him. Perhaps it was time to put these stories down on paper, to create something that could last even longer than the broadcasts. He thanked Emily for her suggestion and promised to consider it. The idea of a book stayed with him over the next few days, growing stronger with each passing thought. He had never imagined his life would take such a turn at this stage, but now it seemed the possibilities were endless. As the storytelling sessions continued to gain traction, the old man couldn't shake the feeling that something more significant was happening. The ripple effect was no longer just about sharing stories. It was about leaving a legacy, something that could outlive him and continue to inspire others long after he was gone. He began to think more seriously about Emily's suggestion. A book could be his way of ensuring that the stories, lessons, and experiences shared through his sessions would continue to reach people, even after his time at the estate had come to an end. He realized that the stories weren't just about the past. They were a way to connect generations, to remind people of the value in every stage of life. But as he began to draft the outline of what would become his book, the weight of the task became apparent. It wasn't just about compiling a series of stories. It was about capturing the essence of what the storytelling sessions had meant to him and to the community. It was about distilling the wisdom and joy that had come from those moments of shared vulnerability and connection. One evening, as he sat by the lake, notebook in hand, Margaret joined him. She had become his confidant during this new chapter of his life, offering her wisdom and insight whenever he found himself grappling with difficult decisions. "I've been thinking about writing a book," he said quietly, glancing at her out of the corner of his eye. Margaret smiled knowingly. "I figured that idea would come up eventually," she said. "You have too many stories not to share them." He nodded, the weight of the task heavy on his shoulders. I want to make sure it's done right. I want it to be more than just a collection of tales. I want it to mean something." Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You've already made it mean something, Mr. Collins. You've changed lives with your stories, and you'll continue to do so, whether through a book or a conversation. But if you feel it's time to put those stories into words that will last, then trust yourself. You'll know how to tell them." Her words gave him comfort, and as he sat there in the fading light, he realized that this was his next step. The book would be his way of ensuring that the connections he had forged through storytelling would continue, long after the sessions ended. The process of writing the book was both challenging and rewarding. Each day, the old man spent hours at his desk, recounting the stories he had shared in his sessions and adding new ones that had yet to be told. The work was slow but steady, and with each page, he felt a sense of purpose growing stronger within him. Emily was a constant source of support, helping him organize his thoughts and offering feedback on the drafts. Margaret, too, was always there with her encouragement, reminding him that the stories he was telling were more than just memories. They were lessons for the future. As the months passed, the book began to take shape. It wasn't just a collection of stories. It was a reflection on life, on aging, on the importance of human connection. It was a reminder that no matter how old we are, we all have something valuable to share with the world. The residents of the estate were eagerly awaiting its completion, often asking him how the writing was coming along. They had become a part of the book, their stories woven into its pages, their voices echoing through the words he had written. Finally, after many months of hard work, the book was finished. It was titled Ripples in Time, Stories That Connect Us All, and it was a testament to the power of storytelling, the importance of connection, and the value of every life, no matter how long or short. The day the first copies arrived at the estate, there was a quiet celebration among the residents and staff. The old man held the book in his hands, feeling the weight of it, both physical and emotional. This was his legacy, a way to ensure that the stories that had brought so much joy and connection to the community would continue to inspire others. As he looked around at the faces of the people who had become his family, he felt a deep sense of peace. His journey was far from over, but he had left something behind that would continue long after he was gone. The ripples he had created had spread far and wide, and now, through his book, they would continue to touch lives for years to come. The old man smiled, content in the knowledge that he had found his purpose and shared it with the world. If you like this story and want to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And now, you have a new video appearing on the screen, full of unexpected twists and heartwarming moments. Click and get ready for another inspiring story.